Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Rockower. I'm president of the Center for Healthy Maryland, the charitable arm of MedChi, the Maryland State Medical Society. First of all, I want to tell everybody that you are not at the Hunt Lecture. This is indeed the Physicians Health Program lecture, despite what the uh, slide may have said in your waiting room. We're here celebrating the Physicians Health Program and its 45 years of helping physicians in the state of Maryland. We do all kinds of good things, including alcohol use disorder and other chemical dependencies, cognitive impairment, behavioral issues, and burnout. And we're helping physicians and other healthcare professionals through all of these things. Previous lectures in this series have included the topics of stigma of mental health problems, reducing suicide risk, and burnout. And we do have more lectures coming up in the next few months and through the end of the year. So be sure that you look out for emails and notices relative to all these. Tonight, we're happy to have Dr. Robert DuPont, who will speak to us about a 5-year recovery program. And I will turn this over to Dr. Marty Rusinowitz, who is our medical director of the Physicians Health Program. Dr. Rusinowitz.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for the introduction. And before meetings like this, people always say it's a great honor to introduce the speaker, but it really is an honor to introduce Dr. DuPont. I feel like a poor country doctor when I look at his CV. So, but I'll briefly tell you, even trimming down his bio took some work because we only have an hour and a half or so. Dr. DuPont is a graduate of Emory University. He received his MD in 1963 from Harvard Medical School. And he completed his psychiatry training at Harvard and the National Institutes of Health. He's a distinguished fellow of the American Society of Addiction Medicine, a life fellow of the American Psychiatric Association, and was chairman of the drug dependence section of the World Psychiatric Association from 74 to 79. For 50 years, he has been a leader in substance use disorder treatment and prevention. In 1978, he became the founding president of the Institute for Behavior and Health, a nonprofit research and policy organization that identifies and promotes powerful new ideas to reduce drug use and addiction. In 1982, he co-founded Bensiger, DuPont and Associates, a leading national consulting firm dealing with substance abuse, with the former DEA administrator, Peter Bensiger. He served as executive vice president through 2015. He has written publications in over 400 professional articles and 15 books. And his most recent monograph in 2018 is actually a book called Chemical Slavery, Understanding Addiction and Stopping the Drug Epidemic. So with that, I will let us proceed, and thank you again for this honor.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. I'm especially honored to have George Kolodner here with us, who goes back about as far as I do, and who I hold in very high regard. But I'm very delighted to be with you. Can we have the first slide? By golly, we did it. Okay, thank you very much. By way of introduction and background, I count myself being in this field since 1968, so 55 years. The first thing I did when I got out of my training and went for a first job was go to work in the DC Department of Corrections. And what I discovered was that the city was in the midst of a heroin epidemic. And as a physician, that was my job, I felt, to kind of understand that and think about what to do about it. And I started a very large program on called the Narcotics Treatment Administration on February 15th in 1969. And I've been in that field ever since. And I just want to say that the best teachers I've had all this time have been my patients. Because I've had my own patients all this time, in addition to other things I have done. And I consider that one of the great blessings in my life to be in this area. And one of my better sort of summaries about it is that it's a learning experience to deal with the drug problem. And drugs and drug use is a teacher, and a very tough teacher, but a very strong teacher. But anyway, I'm very happy to be with you. Let's have the next slide. So I'm going to talk about the fact that most of our treatment episodes are relatively brief, and the problem is a lifelong problem. It's not an episode. It's a major lifelong problem people have, the risk of addiction and return to addiction. And then I wanted to talk also about the physician's health programs, where it came from, what it is, and what it has to offer in terms of teaching for us. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to talk about the fact that we're living in the modern drug epidemic, and this started in the late 1960s in the United States, and it's now a global epidemic. There were drug problems before, going all the way 1,000 years ago, but they were always one drug in one place, and there was a lot of stability to it. That's not the case now. It's now 1,000 drugs from all over the place. It used to be thought that, like with alcohol, you legalized it and the illegal went away. Well, we now know that legalizing drugs doesn't take away the illegal, and the drug problem is never going to go away. There's never going to go back to a time when we didn't have this, and it's a matter of how do we manage it. That's what the game is, and it's a life and death process. But the changes in the supply are particularly stunning. It used to be they were agricultural products from plants, and now it's predominantly synthetic, and the future is all in that. An overdose we're going to talk about. And some of these other things. The drug delivery has changed entirely. Vaping is a good example of that. An example of that, too, also is with tobacco. We didn't have any health problems with tobacco until the invention of the cigarette. Changing the delivery system changed the health consequences profoundly. And the ways we market alcohol are now quite stunningly changed, too. But anyhow, the world of drug supply is unlimited. It's very, the idea that somehow it's a problem in Mexico and China in terms of fentanyl is not even close to right. You can make fentanyl anywhere. Next slide. This is my humility slide. Despite the trillions of dollars that have been spent on the drug problem, this is the overdose curve for the United States. And we have continually made the mistake of thinking about our drug problems were one thing. And I put the things here the way sort of the conventional wisdom had it. We had a heroin problem, and then we had a crack problem, and then we had RX opiates, and we had a little heroin episode, and now we're really into synthetics. But it's always been a polydrug problem. It was from the beginning a polydrug problem. It is today. And the way the media have it and all is just completely wrong. It isn't that. But to add to the complexity of this, all of our diagnoses are substance specific. How about that? Dumb. All of our diagnoses are substance specific. Our problem is not substance specific. And all of our medications are substance specific, in spite of the fact that the problem isn't substance specific. Next slide. One of the striking things about this problem, it's unlike, I don't know of any other medical problem that's like this. It's paid for in cash by the people who have the disease. What I've called the drug problem is commercialized recreational pharmacology. I only said that first word, commercialized, because that's why I have $100 bills there for you. That's very unusual. That's very dramatic for a medical problem, to be paid for by the sufferers, and driven by that. Very important. And what are they buying? what they're buying is super stimulation of brain reward. What they've done is hijack the brain. Drugs do. What do drugs? I'm going to say they. What do drugs do? They hijack the brain reward system, and they're very effective. And there's 1,000 ways to do that, and all kinds of complexities. And there's more to it than just taking drugs. Using drugs as a lifestyle. It's a friendship group. It's all kinds of things. But at root, it's a hijacking of brain reward using chemicals to super stimulate brain reward. And what's the brain reward doing there? Why is that mechanism in the brain? To promote very important biological behavior, particularly food and sex. Those are driven by brain reward, food and sex. They're pretty important in terms of the species, and that's what's been hijacked. And it's the profitable part of the industry is kind of interesting to me, and that is 80% of the drug sales of any drug are going to 20%. So it's really the heavy users who drive the field in this, and that's also very interesting. And then there's the issue of the targeting by the suppliers, particularly economically disadvantaged minority populations. Next slide, please. Now, this is another kind of humbling slide. There are people, well-meaning people, friends of mine, who think that the way to solve the drug problem is to legalize the drugs. One of the best things that's come out of the drug epidemic is, for the first time in history, we've called nicotine and alcohol drugs. They didn't used to be called drugs, but they are now. And that's a big progress. That's really important in terms of the public health issues of it. But look at this. The number of substance use disorders in this population by the past month users of the drugs. And look at the alcohol, how that is so dominant there. And tobacco, this is after 50 years of targeting tobacco. Look at how it is. And then look at marijuana, a dim third in terms of past month use. But then look at the rest of them. Heroin, 500,000. It's stunning to see that. And the idea that somehow we're going to solve this problem by legalizing drugs, you just look at this slide. This is not complicated. Legalization does not do that. Next slide. Now, this is also, this now focuses on, I was talking, the last slide was about use, and this is substance use disorders. And you'll see the same structure here, the same emphasis, or the dramatic. First of all, you got 16.5% of the people with a substance use disorder, and you can see what it is, and how the alcohol dominates that issue. Well, it's pretty dramatic. Next slide. And I mentioned this before, but it is very important to understand that our drug problem is a polysubstance use problem. Our thinking about it is mostly drug at a time. Our medicines are all a drug at a time. Our diagnoses are one drug at a time, but those patients don't exist. The overdose population, people talk now about fentanyl. The average number of drugs in a fentanyl overdose death are 2 to 4, and as many as 11 drugs at the time of death. Come on, a fentanyl problem? But that's what it is. And I think that the goal of treatment, and I'm going to be talking about that, is the goal of prevention is not to use, and treatment is not using the drugs either. But we'll talk some more about that later. Next slide. Now, this is a little reality check about the motivation of drug users. Where does treatment fit into their priorities, the drug users? This is from the household survey. data. That's how the identifications are done for this. But you see, most people with substance do not want treatment. You look at it, 39.5 million say that. 400,000 felt they needed treatment, but made an effort to get treatment. But then you got that they needed treatment, but did not make an effort to get treatment. But look at the relationship between the people who felt they needed treatment and who actually made an effort to get treatment, and the population of the people who met the criteria for substance use disorder. That's pretty striking. Next slide. Now I'm going to give you some slides that I think probably none of you've seen, but we tend to take a very myopic, very sort of slice of time to think about drug problems and what's going on. This is going back to 1975. Why did it go back to 1975? Because that's when the monitoring monitoring the future program started. We started in this country keeping track of 12th graders' drug use in 1975, and that's called the Monitoring the Future Project. I am very proud to say I was the White House drug director who started this program. So I actually began the program Monitoring the Future when I was the White House drug czar. But anyhow, this is what it looks like. And let's just take the alcohol curve. How many people in America know that fall in alcohol use by high school seniors in the United States? How many know that the peak of all of these was about 1980? Zero. Unless they're listening to this talk, know that. You would never know that from the headlines and the things that go on. That's a hell of an achievement. That's really remarkable in terms of alcohol use, past month alcohol use by high school seniors. Look at cigarettes, and you'll see the effect of the Truth campaign, the cigarette money. Well, look at the dramatic drop from starting from about 1997 when that money came in that, and you'll see that the cigarettes have dropped through marijuana, which is kind of amazing to think about that. And if you project those numbers out, you'll see that alcohol is, marijuana is going to pass alcohol very soon and on the current trends. And these trends are long-term trends. Boy, they're not jumping around from year to year. So you can project that out yourself and see where that's going. But the main thing I want you to notice is how it's down. It's down. Nobody but you and me and anybody else who's looked at this graph knows that. 1980 was when it was at a peak. So, that's kind of good news, but I got more good news for you. Next slide. Okay, now this is from the household survey, a little different survey, but just look at the lifetime non-use. Okay, the blue-green line. Take a deep breath so you'll follow what this is. Okay, this is high school seniors. Yes, high school seniors. And it's what percentage in their lifetime never used any drug at all? No alcohol, no cigarettes, no marijuana, no other drug. High school seniors. Back in 1983, it was 2.9%. You can see that, right? Okay, that was what it was. Look what it is now. 36.5% of high school seniors in America didn't use any drug in their lifetimes. Talk about good news. That's amazing to see that. And then the past month non-use, you'll see in the purple line, and that was 16%, and now it's 64%. Those are amazing changes over that period of time. And you'd never know that from the headlines that you see. But it's really important that if people listening to me tonight see that. And I don't want you to forget these graphs because they're really important to understanding this problem. Next slide, please. Now, there's more good news. The biggest thing that's happened in my lifetime in this field is the emergence of a very large recovery population, 23 million people today. And that is really that changes everything, that we have 23 million Americans in recovery today. When you talk about evidence-based, Bob DuPont's evidence-based is, what about these people who 23 million Americans? How did they get there? How do they stay there? What do they think about their lives now that they're in recovery? They are the inspiration and the motivation and the evidence that we need to really do the things that we need to do. And the focus on that goal of recovery, look at here on the right. Recovery is characterized by sobriety, personal health, and citizenship. The darn SAMHSA definitions of recovery have to be defined so that they fit for mental health. Well, drug abuse is different from mental health. Drug abuse has to do with the goal of sobriety means no use of any drug, no use of any drug. Not just no use of alcohol or opiates. It's no use of any drug is what that sobriety means. And that was the official definition of recovery that came from the Betty Ford Center meeting, broadly representative of people. I'm proud to say I was part of that group that made that definition. And you don't see that in most of the things that come now. You talk about reducing the use of this drug or using that. No, sobriety is no use of any drug. And the other thing about citizenship, what does that mean? Why is that word there? That word is there because the person who's using drugs is a different person from that person who's in recovery, a different person. This disease is the only disease where when you get well from the disease, you're a better person than you were before it. And I've talked to a lot of people in recovery, and let me tell you, they, to a person, agree with this about it, the citizenship stuff. Well, you're not going to see that in a lot of the things that come up, and that's a mistake because it really is important. And these people who have done this in all kinds of ways, with medication, without medication, religious activities, all kinds, do it on their own, a lot of them. But anyhow, that's the gold standard is who those people are. And they're diverse. It isn't one answer. It isn't one thing. It's a lot of different things. And that's really important. The other thing is a lot of the people who are in the recovery movement, a decreasing percentage, but still a lot, have the idea that if you're taking medications, you're not in full recovery. That is not true. AA has been very clear about this from the beginning, and so is NA. If you're taking a medicine, the way it's prescribed, that's fully compatible with being in recovery. Now, not everybody believes that, and I understand that, but it's very easy in an urban area to find plenty of meetings that understand that, and I certainly feel that way, and officials do. Even Hazelton, which was the originator of the 30-day program, and is sort of the benchmark for drug-free treatment of addiction. They use opiate. They use naltrexone. Buprenorphine in their program. And when people come into that program and are opioid users, they recommend it. They don't just permit it. They recommend the use of medication. So there's a lot of misunderstanding there, and it needs to be sorted out. Next one. Okay, now I'm going to shift gears, and I'm going to talk about the PHPs. The PHPs are an absolute unique system. Now, there's a similar system for pilots, so I can't say, maybe I shouldn't say absolute, but dramatically different from the way most people with substance use disorders are handled. But how did it happen? How did this one area become so distinctive and so distinguished? And the answer is that the original programs were set up by physicians who were themselves in recovery. And a guy like me would never have been involved in setting up the physicians' health programs because I didn't come from that tradition. I didn't understand that. It took me 20 years in the field to understand that. But it is true, and they had a very clear goal of what they wanted to achieve for the doctors, and they had a sense that if they just made it voluntary for the doctors to decide to come in and voluntary for them to get the treatment, they knew what this disease was going to do, and that was it was going to take them out. And they didn't want to go that way. Anyway, we'll hear more about that. And I'm also going to have plenty of time for Q&A, so you'll be able to get into this discussion. Next slide. These are the elements that you don't see normally or commonly in treatment, and what physicians are uniquely benefited from. The goal of physicians is long-term recovery. That's bold, and it's done with a sustained post-treatment monitoring, a zero tolerance for any drugs, no matter what you have. Oh, another thing that mentioned that you might not know, some of you probably don't, any of you know all of it, but about half of the physicians in the physicians' health programs are alcohol, and 1/3 are opiates, and the other 6 is everything else. But of course, they're all polydrug anyhow. Mostly including the alcohol people too are polydrug. But the answer is that they all do about the same in the program, which is very good. But anyhow, these are the frequently missing elements. Next slide. What happens to a doctor when he or she comes into the program? First of all, they get there because they're referred from the board. The PHP has no punishment. There's no, other than require you to leave the program, nothing else. All the leverage comes from the medical board. None of it comes from the PHP. What PHP does is provide a safe haven from the state medical boards for people who have substance use disorders. And it's characterized by zero tolerance, as we've been talking about. There's an evaluation at the beginning. If a doctor or somebody says they're a problem, that is evaluated professionally. And if do not have a substance use disorder, they are not in the PHP. They've got to be diagnosed as. They can't just be referred there. They have to have a formal diagnosis. And it involves a monitoring contract for 5 years. And what the PHP is doing is protecting them from the punishment or consequences of the state board. And that's the way that goes down. And what do they do with the doctors? Well, the doctors start off typically with a very high quality and usually residential, and for as long as 90 days, but sort of the typical is 30 days still of residential treatment, which is very intensive and paid for by the physicians themselves. And then sustained immersion. From the day one, they are talking to doctors in recovery in the PHPs. It is a program for the doctors in recovery. And that identity is really important to those doctors coming in because none of them want to be there. Virtually none of them do. And they resent it, in fact, in the beginning. But it's long-term monitoring and insistence on no use. We're going to see some data about this. Next slide. Now, around the year 2000, I'd already been in the field a long time. The question came to my mind, my feeble old mind, of how good could outcomes be for this disease? In other words, the most striking thing about treatment of substance use disorders is the relapses. and leaving treatment, dropping out of treatment and relapses. It's very striking. And I said, well, since it's a disease and the disease doesn't know, from what anything else, it's just going to do its disease thing. How good could outcomes be? And I had patients of my own who were physicians in the Physicians Health Program. And I watched what happened to them. And I got to learn about it because I didn't know anything about these programs. And I was very interested in this. So I recruited a friend of mine named Tom McClellan. Tom McClellan is the Dean of Treatment Evaluation in the world. And he's a friend of mine, I'm proud to say. And I got him to do the first, with the support of the national PHP movement, in collaboration with them, the first ever national study of the state PHPs. We got 16 PHPs to join, and we had 802 in the follow-up period of this. And you'll see here some little data, and we'll talk some more about that. But this was only a study of one contract, as it's called. Many people who fail at a contract with a PHP come back for another contract and succeed in that one. We did not look at that in this study. We just looked like one single, it would be the equivalent of one episode of treatment, not looking at treatment over the course of a lifetime or many years, just one episode of treatment. So the data you're going to see is just a single episode of treatment. Next slide. Now, this is what's happened to the physicians. The 5-year follow-up, 78% were licensed, 4 had retired, 11 had their right license revoked. In this episode, that didn't mean they ended up that way, but for this episode, they had that. Next slide. Okay, this to me is one of the most striking slides I've ever seen. PHPs, the doctors, for 5 years, it's 5 years they're in this. And every day they're subject to being tested. And the testing can be a hair test, a fingernail test, a blood test, anything. They don't know what it's going to be, but it's the testing skills in the PHPs set the standard for testing and comprehensiveness of this. But they don't know whether they're going to be tested, and they're subject to random testing. And if they tested one day, they could be tested the next day because it's random about what it's going to be. That's really important for this testing. But over the course of 5 years, 78% of them had not one single positive test, or a missed test. If you miss a test, it's called positive. Now, how many treatment programs do you think look like that? 78% in 5 years of random testing, 0 positive tests? Come on, that's pretty amazing. And then you look, of those who had a positive test, which was 22%, 14, 2/3 of them never had a second positive test. That also is amazing to think about that. Down here is picked up on what I said before about opiates and alcohol, because those are the dominant in this, including IV opiates. And the results are essentially identical. They're equally good with the alcohol and the drugs, including opiates. That also is very striking data. Next slide. Now, my favorite study of this was a second study. And a lot of people who saw those data that you just saw say, oh, that's just because they have a guillotine over their heads. You can get their attention like that. But what happens after they leave? So we did a study 5 years after completing a PHP contract. Now, let me say that again. We studied physicians 5 years after they had completed a PHP contract in an anonymous online survey with 8 PHPs. 89% completed the contract without a relapse. That was about what they had done. Others had relapses and then come back again. But 96% of these physicians, 5 years later, were in recovery. I think it was one patient, maybe two, who, because of the study, turned themselves in as not being in recovery to it. But it's a stunning example of positive test result duration of a significant sample of patients. Next slide, please. This also is one of the slides that I really want to have sort of drive home with you. The physicians, when they go in, they have this residential treatment, typically intensive treatment, and then they're monitored, and they have psychiatrists like me. They see a psychiatrist for the 5 years. They do all kinds of things, and they go to AA and NA meetings too, or some other community program. Now, 95% of them are AA and NA. They're 12-step programs. Not all, it's not 100%, but it's 95% of them are in 12-step meetings. Anyhow, 88% of them went to 12-step meetings, 69% during the past year. Think about that. 5 years after they're finished the program, 69% were going to AA and NA meetings. Come on, folks, that's data. It's really stunning. They weren't required to go. They chose to go. 69%. 96% were currently licensed, and none had lost their license due to substance abuse. Next slide. And this is a little bit about, I talked to some about this earlier, about how this happened. It grew out of the employee assistance model that was common in major employers at the time it started, which was about 45 years ago. Many of the early leaders were physicians themselves in recovery. They were interested in long-term outcomes, and they had a very keen sense of the fact that the people were not going to be happy about being identified, and a lot of them anyhow, and that there was leverage used to get them into treatment. Next slide. Okay, we're talking about a biological disease. If this was myocardial infarction and you had data that showed this kind of result, even if it was in a specialized group, that would be considered very important. But this shows that a 5-year recovery, I mean, no use of any drug, 5 years in this treatment is an achievable goal. Now, it's a special circumstance and a special population, I understand, but just think about the biological disease. That's very important. And how they resisted treatment. There are people who go in voluntarily, but it's not the main thing. They mostly are referred in on a basis of some problem they have. And the other thing that is striking to me is, what do they value the most? You'll see that here in terms of these 12-step fellowships and the brief but important and intense treatment they had mostly in residential care. Next slide. I think that there's more to be done with the PHPs, and I wish the FSPHP would be far more invested in research, because I think that the rest of the country and the rest of the world can learn from these experiences, and that there's I would say an opportunity, but I would say also an obligation of the PHPs to do this study. And it's not going to show that everything is wonderful. Everybody doesn't make it. That's right. There are, even in this situation, people who don't make it, and that's important. At least don't make it the first time, although a lot of them do make it when they come back again in that. And I think that's very important. But the main thing I think the PHPs do is they hold up the concept that large majorities of people can get into stable long-term recovery. That's very important. Next slide. Thank you. Well, I got one more thing to say before I get to thank you. And that is that, and I don't know, the slide must have come up and I must have not spoken about it. At least I don't remember speaking about it. I want to say it again to everybody. We asked these physicians in the follow-up 5 years later, what was the most important thing to you in terms of your PHP experience? What was the biggest thing that helped you? And there were two things that stood out. They drug testing, they had all kinds of things they liked, they thought was good. But when we got them to just pick one, what was the one thing? The one thing that was picked more than anything else was the 12-step programs. Now think about that. 40% of them picked that as the number one. 25%, I think it was, who picked their treatment program. But think about what treatment meant to these people. Treatment meant that 30 days or 60 days or 90 days residential out of 5 years. That was the second highest in that the percentage who thought it was 12 steps. And that was shown by the fact that they were still going to meetings 5 years later after they didn't have to go anymore. They were showing with their behavior about how important that was. That's a heck of a finding to see that. And the other thing that they voted they liked most highly was the treatment. Those were the things that of all that, not the drug testing, but those two things stood out. Now, I'm going to let the thank you stand there. I am so happy to be with you. I revere the PHPs. I understand how unrepresentative it is. I understand you can't do that with other populations, but it still is a marker about this disease that I think deserves to be attended to. And I think that PHPs can also help with other programs to learn something. And even if they don't do anything else, just by their existence, they set a standard that is pretty remarkable. If doctors did that much better than other people with myocardial infarction or some neurological disease, we'd pay attention to it. Anyway, I'll end there and be happy to have your questions and comments or objections.
So thank you, Dr. DuPont. That was wonderful information. I think it's very thought-provoking, and I'm sure that we've got a number of questions. There are two options. People can raise their hands or, just ask to speak, or they can put questions in the chat, that either one. I see Dr. Bourbano has his hand raised, so please ask your question.
Yeah, Dr. DuPont, thank you very much for such a great presentation. In one of your slides, you showed that drugs are more available now than they were before. However, in the 12th graders that you show, they are less likely to use drugs than they were before.
Yes.
Do you think that is because there is also more education, social media, and they see the consequences of drug addiction? Or what is the...
Well, you're picking on one aspect of the study that I think is really important, and that was not related to the PHP, but related to youth drug use. And you got that stunning data about youth, the increasing. I think what that's called is cultural learning. I don't think it represents a program. It represents the experience of the youth in terms of seeing what the consequences are of the drug use. And I think there's an increasing percentage who can see that this is something that's very dangerous. The other thing that I have devoted my career to is a nonprofit organization called the Institute for Behavior and Health. And our number one focus is on prevention. And it has to do with youth, because youth is where substance abuse is a pediatric onset illness. 90% of the people, adults, started their drug use before the age of 18, oftentimes 15, 14. I mean, it's quite young that that often happens. And the terrible reality is that we now have a situation where we normalize youth drug use. We say it's normal for kids to try drugs. They're trying different things. They've got to find their own way. Well, the idea of saying that it's normal for young people to use drugs is a terrible message to kids. And so what we're doing is trying to denormalize that and instead normalize no use. And that's to protect the brain from the seduction of drugs. The whole program is based on kids, what they're doing. So I'm high on kids leading the way to prevention and showing it in their behavior. And so the key thing that we do is get these kids to talk about it. And I'm very pleased to say I've worked with the American Academy of Pediatrics, and that they have established the standard for health for youth. Youth is no use of nicotine, no use of alcohol, no use of marijuana, because of that special vulnerability of the adolescent brain. Well, that's a cultural change that's huge. Anyway, I appreciate that question about kids.
So I see a hand raised, and we also have a question in the chat. I'm going to go to the chat first. What role do you think physicians' financial security and social support network have in favorable outcomes relative to the general population?
Yes, I think it does. I think that that's all a positive. They have a tremendous stake in get. They got to deal with the board, and they're not going to practice medicine if they drop out and decide to go on. That's a pretty severe consequence for a doctor. You can't repeat that anywhere else. It's hard to think about. Well, the airline pilots have the same thing. They cannot fly an airplane with the FAA if they don't participate. So they got a tremendous leverage there that is not transferable. And I think that that's right. So anybody who says, my patients don't have leverage, that's right. It is true. But it's still important to understand. And I think that one of the things that I find troubling about where we're going as a field is the normalization of continued drug use. And to me, the answer with terms of substance use disorder is not just stopping the drug you main problem with, but stopping the drug use altogether. That's, to me, that's a lesson that's really important. I'm perfectly happy with harm reduction as long as it's a step toward sobriety. But if harm reduction is the end of the line, that's unhealthy. That's a destructive disease, corrosive to the character of the person, and it's not an acceptable outcome. People choose it. That's because of what addiction does. But at least we can be clear to ourselves when we deal with somebody who's got a substance use disorder. The goal is sustained sobriety. That's radical. That's where I am.
Thank you. Dr. Whitney, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you very much. I sent you this question directly, but I'll also ask you it. First of all, thank you so much for being here. You're one of my research heroes. But are you aware of any published studies that compare the initial brief treatment IOP versus 30-day residential versus 90-day residential? The 90-day model pioneered by Doug Talbot, of course, kind of caught on. And we at the Ohio PHP, I gave a paper at the Federation meeting last time, just announcing our results. that we didn't find that much difference at all between initial treatment at an IOP level care versus residential 30 days versus long-term residential, that the key was the 5-year monitoring by the PHP that really helped put that solid sobriety floor under them. Are you aware of studies that have made that comparison, sir?
Oh, I don't know, but one of the things that's striking to me is about patients who have been in the 90-day experience, and my experience with those people is they loved it. You know, they felt blessed rather than forced into it after they had done it. But so I'm for a variety of things about like that, and you know, financial reasons could be one reason to think, because they're paying for it. Could be part of that. Could be part of that picture. But I don't know. I don't think there is any one way, and I think to have some variety in there is probably a good idea. But it's in the context of this, and again, I think people who are in regular free-range treatment don't have the kind of access to people in recovery that the physicians do. That is very inspiring to see that, and they see it all the time. It's really it's really quite wonderful. There's a big issue in the PHPs, and just to get into to me the most difficult conflict is the PHP's use of buprenorphine and methadone for opiate use disorder. And that's anathema to the PHPs. And they got good data to show that it isn't necessary, that they do such a great job with the opiates anyhow. But I think that there's an appearances issue that could be a problem. I don't know. I don't think that's a battle worth fighting personally. But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
So we have a comment here, and I see, Marty, you've got your hand raised, so let me read out the comment. This is from Linda Bresnahan, and if anybody doesn't know, she is actually from FSPHP. She says, thank you for this. FSPHP. Thank you for this groundbreaking PHP study. It has proven to be essential in validating the PHP model. FSPHP would like to repeat it. Creating an electronic system of pooling anonymized PHP data. I'm working on a plan to pilot this. Funding is needed. Okay, call to action.
Well, go to NIDA. That's the place I'd go. That's where the money is, and see what you can do there. And please, Linda, put me on your advisory group, and I will go there and march with you to see Nora.
Okay, Marty.
Well, I have a question and a comment. The question is, you know, one of the things I like the most about working with a PHP is that we use a medical model. We treat this as a disease. And one of the things I think we overlook is how many people recur. You know, if they have a heart disease or diabetes, we give different names for it. We never call it a relapse. But the numbers for this life-threatening disease are so much better. Now, I could be wrong, but I still believe they're so much better, and the relapse rate is lower than the recurrence rate in heart disease and diabetes and all the rest. We should say it have glorious results. I mean, it's not perfect, and clearly motivation in PHPs for us and airline pilots helps a great deal. But even sort of the average common Joe who just gets into proper treatment and a recovery program and goes to meetings and all the rest, you know, it's a fatal disease that, you know, they've put into, you know, what do we call it for cancer? I'm losing the word, but it's not active, okay? And I think we should press that a little bit more. I mean, I think we do better with this life-threatening disease than most others. So
but it's stunning results. It's not just better.
Yeah, I know. It's yeah, we should be proud of it. And if somebody has a heart attack and they have bypass or stents put in and they don't stop smoking and they're obese and they don't exercise and they have another MI, they get another set of stents. There may be people may be a little judgmental in the operating room about them, but in general, they had bad disease, and that's not really true. Anyway, that comment's obvious. My question is, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I want to hear your question. Go ahead.
The question is, in 12-step meetings, do you think there's any advantage to having, say, 12-step meetings just for doctors? I mean, I'm as liberal as they come, and I think everybody should be included in everything that exists. But in my experience, 30 years ago, I used to attend a 12-step meeting that was primarily doctors. I mean, it was labeled that. I won't tell you what the label was, but only doctors in recovery. And then word got out that, educated people had their own meetings. So suddenly lawyers started showing up, and then business executives started showing up. And it diluted the meetings so that after about 5 years of attending, it was really not useful for me. Has that ever been looked at in terms of 12-step meetings?
Well, one of the things, first of all, this is a very favorable audience. I'm not used to such a positive response as this, so I'm a little, unsure of my feet on the ground here with this. But I do think that one of the things that's very striking to me is the more sophisticated leaders are in our field, the less likely they are to talk about 12 steps. There's an inverse relationship that drives me absolutely wild. That somehow that they'll call it recovery support or something like that, but they don't see it as central to it, and they don't see it as specific as I do. I say, and I say this in most of my presentations to the public, is I'm proud to be an American for a lot of reasons. I'm a very proud American. But one of the top reasons is because of what happened in Akron, Ohio in 1935. That program was a miracle. And it came out, it was a perfectly American miracle. No money, no credentials, no training, no license. It's the people helping each other. I don't know anything else like that. It's absolutely stunning, and it's all over the place, and it morphs. You were talking about getting people come in from other things. You can set up. Anybody can set up a meeting. You don't have to get a license from New York to set up a meeting. They say, what about evaluation? The users are evaluating every day whether they come or not. That's what the evaluation is. Well, what else is like that? Nothing. But that's more sophisticated the expert is in the addiction field, the less likely they are to talk about AA and NA. And I think that's terrible. I can tell you one story. When I started the program in DC, I mentioned was a heroin addiction treatment program. Methadone wasn't everybody methadone, but mostly it was methadone. And I had a group of ex-addict advisors, I call them, who had been arrested. There had been a heroin epidemic 10 years before that nobody much knew about, but it was dealt with by incarceration. And so these were people who had used heroin but hadn't used it recently. And they were a generation older than the people who were most of my patients. But anyway, one of them, whose name was Nat Turner, he was very public about it. Wonderful guy in Washington and sort of a public figure too. He was retiring from a government job he had, and I went to his retirement party and I asked him about the other guys. Where are the other guys? What's going on with them? And catch me up on it. There's like 10 of them there were. He went down the list. They were all dead. All dead. And I assumed they had gone back to heroin. None of them went back to heroin. They all died of alcoholism. And I said, well, these were all heroin addicts. And I said, how come you're alive and they're dead? He said, I went to meetings and they didn't. I mean, that's a searing statement that I've carried away for my life. I think it's so striking to see that. So I feel very strongly about this. I don't think everybody needs to do it. You can do other things, that's fine. But you're going to have a hard time finding other meetings. What does that mean? Why can you find so many 12-step meetings and it's so hard to find the other meetings? There's data there. What does that data mean? I say, do you think the government's paying them 12-step meetings? So Rockefeller is paying for them? No, can't. They don't want your money. That's quite remarkable.
We do have a couple more questions. I hope folks can stick around for a little while longer. Next question, do we have data on success rates for addicted residents returning to residency, particularly high-risk residencies like anesthesiology?
Yes. Well, I'm not the world's expert on the anesthesiology, and the expert is in Boston at Mass General, and I forgot his name at the moment. I can't remember it, but he's a very good friend of mine, and he's very expert at all of that. I don't know, but my sense is that there's lots of people with who are anesthesiologists who are in recovery, so I don't give up on them at all about that. In residence is young. I don't know. I'm sure that is high risk. The story of the way the drug use shows up in anesthesiology is that the young doctor is found dead in the physician's recreation room is the first sign of the problem. It's a pretty incredible exposure to the opiates and other drugs that they have. But I don't know. I don't give up on them. I don't know of the study.
Okay, and then another question that kind of dovetails into that, are there stats about what age doctors started using substances?
I don't know that we asked that. We may have. I probably have data on that, but I don't remember it. Because the study was at nearly 1,000 doctors, and I'm sure we got that data, but I didn't ever publish anything about it. By the way, there have been about 10 studies published from that one, 10 articles published from that one study. It was a wonderful source of data on all kinds of things.
Great. Another question, were 3 or 4 years studied in comparison to the 5-year model?
No, and I don't know that, I think that's an interesting question. How could you pare it down and make it more affordable to the doctors, more affordable to the public? And I don't know that. But I can tell you this, that what I know about the PHPs, they haven't been focused on making it the least intrusive or the least expensive. They've been focused on making it the most effective. And I don't know that there's a lot of enthusiasm with trying to do it a cheaper, easier way. I don't know, because people just, want to do more rather than less with it. But again, I'd let the people who know more about it than I do to answer that question.
Thanks. Dr. Kolodner, you have your hand up?
Yeah, in response to what Bob just said, and by the way, I always love hearing Bob talk, not just because I like him, but he has an upbeat message and backs it up with data and evidence. And in a field that's where we struggle with pessimism that can become self-fulfilling, I think looking at the positive side is always beneficial. But when he just spoke about doing it cheaper, I was so cheered by what Dr. Whitney said, because if we look at, we've done great, how can we do even better? And I think if we can get the same results cheaper, I think we could make an argument for doing that. And I certainly have a bias because I am biased toward IOP. I spent my whole career doing IOP. And when it came to PHPs, I was always swimming upstream. I've worked closely with Maryland PHPs and with the DC and Virginia, and have, I think, a good relationship with them. But they were loath to send me people for primary rehab for IOP. They would send people for 6 weeks or extended residentials, and then they would send them to me for follow-up, and I would follow them for years. And I can tell you the financial hardship of going into a 3-month residential was considerable, and it takes a lot for people to recover, and they certainly did that. But if they can manage without that, I think that is worth considering, even if you don't let them go back and practice for 90 days. But just the expense of the residential and of relocating and being away from their families, I think. So I was so heartened because I was never able to really look at that because I didn't have the primary experience. But to hear Dr. Whitney say that they looked at that and it was equal, I would hope that maybe the PHP would start to consider, based on that positive evidence, trying out IOP as a primary. And just a disclaimer, I'm no longer run my IOP, so it's not as if I'm going to benefit from this, but I think that some of the future docs in the PHP might.
Thank you. Dr. Sprouse, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to follow up with a question on age. And my question is that, the brain is how you handle habits is very different when you're younger versus when you're older. And I think you brought up a good point that a lot of addictions start when kids are in their 15s and 16s. So if the physicians were starting at 24 and 25 before they were getting into trouble, maybe that's why there's a big difference in how they were able to do better in their treatment programs.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting also about the kids. The drug use of all kinds is illegal before the age of 21. So that's alcohol, that's marijuana, that's everything. And that's why we picked that number. In biology, you'd probably pick a later date, maybe 25. But it's interesting in terms of a sort of a simple message that 21 is a pretty good number to use because people are used to thinking about it for things like that.
I mean, would it be worth going back and looking at the data and see if you can figure out when these people started?
You do that though, not with me, with my data, but with the national data, the household survey things, for example, I get think about. But getting something in that is a big project. That's millions of dollars.
Thank you.
And Dr. Jackson.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions or comments. One, if it could be figured out how to run the program for 4 years instead of 5 and compare it with historical data you had with 5, it would be nice. And again, I don't know what the results would be. I have a feeling that they would be similar, but I mean, you've got good data that shows that 5 years works very, very well. And I just throw that out. Somebody from Ohio I think was mentioning some of that as far as extent of inpatient treatment, et cetera. I know that I've been temporary PHP medical director at Texas twice, total of about 4 months. But I was struck by especially young physicians in training programs or in medical school. The debt that they carry now is unbelievable. And then when you talk to them about going for residential treatment anywhere, I mean, they just are struck back. And the way practice is today, I'm retired, thank goodness.
Are you hearing? I can't hear
But I mean, now people, it's hard for them to get away during the day to drug test. In Texas, they've fortunately just extended the time that they can test until 6 p.m. on the day called. But for a while, it was 3 p.m. in the middle of a day. Now, we are a state affiliated program, one of the, I think, three in the state, in the physician, in the federation. But when ours started in 2010, there was no other way that a PHP was going to be established in our state if it weren't associated with the board, because the trust between the board and the Texas Medical Association's program was zero on each side. And there have been improvements, but there's a way to go here. But the cost for the young people is unbelievable. And the thing I would say from my limited experience, the people that really benefit from 3 months are especially those who are really reluctant to admit they have a problem, admit it only, you know, when the alternatives are given, and they're away and embedded in a recovery community long enough where they really start to get the idea that life can be different. But I don't see a lot of difference myself between people who are willing and they accept they got a problem, I need help. IOP 30-day program seems to work pretty well for many of those people. That's all I have.
Yeah, I think that's right. One of the things you got to remember is that the PHPs are not interested in, as a rule, in making it cheaper or more, you know, doing those experiments because things are working out so well. That would be the thing, though, to be studied. And I think if you did, you could do a dynamite job. How much less good could it be before you decided that was not worth doing? I don't know. You'd have a lot of questions about what kind of data you'd need to accept a lower success rate. I don't know, but anyway, I don't have an opinion about that, or I don't have an understanding or recommendation.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. I think, you know, I want to dovetail on your point about the difficulty, the financial difficulties some doctors have, especially young doctors. I think that is a significant thing that we see in Maryland. I do think that, you know, somehow we have to address that. I'm also going to, you know, agree with Dr. Kolodner that, you know, different types of treatment, different intensities of treatment are, you know, can be very helpful in those kinds of situations too. Dr. Sroka, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I actually posted a question, but many years ago, I recall listening to a discussion about drug abuse, and they talked about findings on PET scans that when particular individuals predisposed to drug abuse were given the substance, a particular area in their brain, I don't know, it was the amygdala or what, lit up like a Christmas tree, and the people that were not genetically predisposed to the substance abuse problems didn't seem to have that same cerebral effect. Do you recall any history about those studies with the PET scans and the difference in the genetically cerebral predisposition for these drug abusers?
No, but
I hope that makes sense.
National Institute on Drug Abuse, of which I was the first director, is doing that kind of studies with incredible sums of money. I don't know, it's like $1.5 billion a year doing that, those studies. And I'm not expert at that, but there's a lot of stuff like that going on. I wish they would do studies more like the kind of things that what the PHPs are doing, that but they want to study brain chemistry or brain biology. That's where everybody thinks that's the same thing, for example, at the National Institute of Mental Health and Alcoholism. All three of them are all in into the brain studies. I don't know how that's going to work out.
Do you agree that there's a serious genetic predisposition to these serial abusers?
Yeah, I think so, but I think a lot of them, there's a lot of variations, I think, in the genetics of the people who are substance use. And I think it's, the main factor is the willingness to do it, to use the drugs, and to keep doing it. And I think that's a very big factor, who's willing to do that and who's not willing to do that.
Do you feel the buprenorphine programs are one of the better programs, or how do you feel about it?
I like buprenorphine, but I'm a friend of methadone also. I don't know, but one of the things that's going on right now that is very striking and very controversial is having methadone, which is a pure agonist and with a tremendous overdose potential. Buprenorphine doesn't have that, which is very good. But methadone is really, when I started my methadone program in Washington, we had an epidemic of methadone overdose deaths that almost ended our program. And that's why we got very tight about take home and all those sorts of things. And what's being now proposed is essentially treating methadone like buprenorphine. Have a doctor be able to prescribe that to a person who's an opiate. That's scary to me to think about that. But I'm old, and who knows about what my experience is. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But it's scary to me in terms of the overdose potential. I think the people who are doing that have not seen a bunch of methadone overdoses. It almost ended my program.
Thank you. It was a wonderful lecture, by the way. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kalodner, you still have your hand raised. Did you have another question?
Yeah, I was kind of going and argue against myself. I was concerned when Dr. Jackson talked about reducing the cost, which I had argued for. I wouldn't do it by shortening the follow-up. And I know there's so little data about the long-term recovery. And one of the pieces of data I've always held on to is George Valent's prospective study of alcoholism, which if people are not familiar with it, I would urge you to look at that, where he followed people for 70 years and came out with what he thought was a discouraging conclusion, that it's not until you are 5 years into recovery that there is a substantial change, that you're back to a normal level of danger. So that 5 years always stuck with me. And I don't know if that's why the PHP took 5 years, but in a field where we don't have much long-term data, that to me would be something to not shorten and not cheapen, especially since the follow-up treatment is relatively less expensive. I mean, 1 year of follow-up treatment compared to 90 days of residential treatment is, I think, more affordable. And also by then, your doctor is back into being income producing, so it's not such a hardship for him. So I would argue against that.
Margaret, I read an article about the 5-year standard for recovery with two very distinguished co-authors, the deputy director of NIDA and Tom McClellan. And I'd like to be able to send that email that
That'd
to you.
be wonderful. That'd be great.
But it basically makes the point that George is making, that's the way to look at this disease. What you really want, and as it was based on George Vaillant's observation about that, and of course it also has a resonance with the cancer survival number of 5 years that they have used. But it really does give you a sense of what you're trying to get to, and I think that is that 5-year recovery. You'll notice that's in our my lecture also, but it was a specific paper that I'm very proud of.
By all means, please, send it to me. I will be reaching out to everyone by Monday with the link for CMEs. So Dr. DuPont, if you can send it to me, I can attach it to the email that I send out to everyone. And then also, since this is recorded, this will be part of the recording, so people can ask me for it if they want it. Dr. Jackson, I saw you had your hand up. We're just about out of time, so I didn't want to cut anybody off, but did you have some, I guess, a final question?
Dr. DuPont mentioned the 5-year may have been chosen because of the cancer cure rates, back then. It makes perfect sense. And it's a small point if you could determine that they were equal, you could shorten the monitoring phase. But why argue with success? I don't think you think anything. It's hard to think impossible to believe it would be any better. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. DuPont. This has been wonderful. I think it sparked a lot of conversation, a lot of thought, a lot of ideas. So thank you so much for being part of our lecture series, for doing this this evening. I see people clapping. I also want to thank everybody here who has tuned in, contributed. I think that there's a lot of good information here to take back to your practices, wherever that is, whether it's PHPs or elsewhere. So thank you very much to all of you. I do want to let everybody know that we do these lectures free of charge. We will have some more coming up, as Dr. Rockauer said when he started things off. Definitely one in March. And Dr. Razinowitz, Marty, Dr. Kolodner, Mike Lafrio, Dr. Hildreth, who is one of our other medical directors here in Maryland's PHP, and Barry Lubin, who's with Affinity. All of them will be on a panel in March. I think that's going to be fascinating, very interesting. So tune in and look for the notice from me. We're also a nonprofit. We're always in a fundraising mode. We really see, and again, I'm going to say, we see folks that don't have a lot of money coming to us, and we do not want to shortchange them on their program. We don't want to make this a lesser kind of recovery option for people who don't have the means. So please consider a donation to us. I posted a link in the chat, and I will send that link also when I send you the link for the CME. But please consider that. Please consider, if you're not in Maryland, supporting the PHP in your state. And please consider supporting the Federation. They do amazing work. I just want to echo that. So thank you very, very much, everybody, especially Dr. DuPont. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.